Tarke here, and with the recent news that traps in 3.3 will have no cooldown and this will extend along to the trap support gem, I just wanted to show off a few different trap setups, since I've been getting a lot of questions about, Tarke, have you heard that trap support gem has no cooldown? Yes, I have heard that. Also, I want to briefly mention the difference between traps and mine targeting. So with traps, traps don't target anything, they just sort of trigger. So for example, with this, they just do an AoE based around it. So it's like, okay, that makes sense. Now, for example, with Kinetic Blast, they just fire off randomly. Right? Any which direction. This means that certain projectile-based traps are actually very awkward because you can't dictate which way they're going. So, while something like KB traps has a lot of potential on paper, to get it to actually go where you want it to go, and when it comes to like overlapping on walls, even if you throw it right next to a wall, they might all shoot. Literally, none of them hit this back wall, so it's a perfect example. So when it comes to picking what you want to do, you need to make sure, will your targeting get in the way of that? So to show you some examples of skills which can't aim, but, you know, actually doesn't really matter, would be something like Magma Orb. I would recommend taking your headsets off briefly. Now, they've said that Magma Orb is getting a new visual in the upcoming patch. Magma Orb is a historically powerful skill, but doesn't see much play just because it's so obnoxious, both visually and audibly. But this is the kind of thing where it has so much coverage, it doesn't matter that the AoE on it, the targeting on it is bad. And then the go-to, like, age-old examples are like Lightning Trap, which just shoots in a massive nova. So, general rule of thumb, when it picks the, when it comes to picking your trap skills, go for stuff which fires in a AoE nova or has so much coverage it doesn't matter. And also, I'll briefly mention Cold Snap. Traps don't respect the Cold Snap cooldown, meaning that if they keep this the same way, in 3.3 you'll be able to infinitely spam Cold Snap traps, and the new Cold Snap looks very, very sexy. So that's worth keeping in mind. And also it's been confirmed unofficially by Ziggy that the max trap limit will be something like 20. So currently there's a quite low trap limit, meaning that if I were to throw a bunch of Ice Nova traps and then throw some Shock Nova traps, the Shock Nova traps would actually overwrite the Ice Nova and they'll never actually trigger. This was quite a big... Oh, one of them got off then. But that was quite a big concern with people, like, oh, will we have too much trap throwing speed? Well, with a much higher limit, that's much less of an issue. So that's something to really think about. So let's get into my sort of TLDR. So when it comes to approaching a trapper, work out what is your AoE skill, what is your single target skill, what is your utility skill. Shimron is very powerful, I know, but if you're using Shimron, please do use a Queen of the Forest, otherwise you'll have absolutely zero movement options. If you're going for, you know, something like in Quiz, it doesn't really matter what elemental type you are, but I've tried to group everything into elemental types. Another important thing to keep in mind is what kind of maps are you running. So for example, if you're doing, you know, complete open maps, you want to be running something like Lightning Trap. Whereas if you're doing very tight linear maps, running something like Arc or Ice Nova or Shock Nova is fine because that's the size of the entire room. So keep that in mind. What kind of maps are you actually regularly running? And I also prepared this very handy little piece of art. I think the meta is going to be running very short, very linear maps, so you can hit Alva as frequently and reliably as possible per hour. So you want to be sticking to tight linear maps like Racecourse, Scourge, Strand, etc. Not big open sprawling maps, because if you have Alva hiding in a little corner somewhere, you might miss her. So that's a big no, big yes. Right. So let's get into the actual groupings now. For Lightning, I've recommended for your AoE setup, use either Lightning Trap on open layouts, Arc, Shock Nova, or Ball Lightning. In the case of using Ball Lightning, you can also use that for your single target. And also an important thing to keep in mind, up until, you know, probably tier 13 or something, you can use just your zero cooldown trap for everything, absolutely no problem. It's only really when you get into the much higher content and getting into like the Guardian stuff, you really need to actually worry about single target. But to be honest, we have so much free damage these days and traps are so powerful, you could make do just lightning trapping everything. But for single target, you want to be using a Lightning Spire, Ball Lightning, or Cremation. If you want to see a Lightning Spire in action, Ziggy made a very informative video on it today. However, there's a lot of questionable questions about how exactly it works. We spoke to Bex briefly, and she's passed on a handcrafted message onto the team. So, in the form of a haiku, as all good content really is, Bex me sorry much, we accidentally called her a bitch. Lightning Spire AoE, cause overlap harm. Ziggy D art lie, Lightning Spire AoE, mechanic mark no. How much overlap, Lightning Spire AoE, do his base mark no. So, basically, if you don't know what that means, the way that Lightning Spire works is it has increased overlap with the more AoE we have. If you don't have enough AoE over on your tree or like support gems, you won't get that much overlap, meaning it may not be that good when it comes to single target. Now, keeping in mind that the main lightning skills you want to be using are looking, like stuff which doesn't really scale off of AoE in the case of Lightning Trap and Arc. Yes, both Shock Nova and Ball Lightning does. That makes it kind of awkward. So, going into Cold, we have Cold Snap, ignoring the cooldown, Ice Nova, Whispering Ice, Ice Trap. We don't know how Ice Trap will change. Whispering Ice will be very solid single target, but will have terrible frames. FPS is a real big issue there. Freeze Pulse, Frostbolt, Glacial Cascade have terrible targeting. Your single target's most likely going to be spamming your AoE setup or doing Cold to Fire shenanigans and doing stuff like Cremation, etc. For Fire, you have the most options here in my opinion. You can use Fire Trap, Volatile Dead, Magma Orb, but probably mute the game for Magma Orb. Now, Fire Trap, Volatile Dead, and Magma Orb all actually pull very good single target by themselves, but can be further supported by Cremation, Flamethrower Trap, and Firestorm. But again, FPS issues. The physical skills are a little bit more interesting. Now, Explosive Trap is a new trap we're getting at level 1. It has a very low base AoE though, so it's mostly just going to be a single target setup, not really used for AoE clear. EK Nova and Bladeful, even if you're going for like a full AoE tree, EK Nova with faster proj in the links is enough for map clear and will have better AoE than most full AoE setups and has none of the frame issues that Bladeful does. So if you want to do a Fizz Trapper spell-wise, I'll probably just do EK Nova and Explosive Trap single target. You can also use Seismic Trap to help out a little bit, but because of the 8-second cooldown and the fact it's mostly an AoE skill, it's a little bit awkward. Bows, or people like to play the bow trappers. I would recommend Rain of Arrows, Cluster Trap for all of your AoE needs. You could use Tornado Shot, but it's probably not needed. To be honest, Rain of Arrows is looking very, very powerful with the AoE overlap potential. Also, an important thing to note, both Chinsalt and Point Blank. Point Blank with traps is from where the trap was thrown. So, for example, if this torch here was the boss and I throw my trap at it, if the trap triggers there, that's point blank range. So it counts from where the trap is triggered, not from where it's thrown. That makes point blank and Chinsol very powerful with traps. And for single target, you're going to be using Shrapnel Shot, probably going to be the best over all the options, but Blast Rain is also looking very powerful, and Val Burning Arrow is always very powerful. Wand targeting looks very messed up, as I showed you with the Kinetic Blast. Now, the reworked Power Siphon looks like it will have auto-aim, so that potentially will be very powerful, but then your single target options are rather limited. And one important thing to note is if traps ignore the Blink Mirror Arrow cooldown, then that's going to be ridiculously overpowered and probably needs nerfing, so play that if it ignores the cooldown. I'll also show you 2 example skill trees. If you want to have like more general build making advice, I already have one video covering some more general ascendancy options, but here's a life and a CI option. I think Scion is very powerful, but I'll open with Saboteur. So considering that most of the new traps have 0 cooldown outside of the utility traps and the single target traps, you don't really need to be getting chain reaction for the cooldown recovery. It also means you don't really need to be getting cooldown recovery on the tree. Now, obviously, all of this stuff could change. These are just like initial tips. So unless you're planning on doing something very wonky, I wouldn't really bother with that. Now, the main strength of Saboteur is in chain reaction. Now, chain reaction is still good. I would recommend either going chain reaction Saboteur or playing Sunblast. Use one or the other. Without it, it will just feel very bad. This does still give you some AoE, which makes everything feel a bit better. It does give you some damage. You do get some damage in here, and for your traps, trigger other traps, but this feels pretty weak, to be honest. For hardcore, I'd probably recommend getting Board in the Shadows from your normal lab, then getting this. You could even go Board in the Shadows and Pyro if you want to be super safe and respecking. But to get the most out of Pyromaniac, which is really the main power node of Saboteur, It gives you up to 20% regeneration if you've triggered traps recently, which is very easy to do. Also gives you immune to ignite and immune to shock. And because of that, I recommend CI. Waggle also recommends CI, and Waggle's actually good at the game, so don't take my advice, take his advice. Change this tree based on if you're doing, projectile stuff. If you're going AoE, get the AoE nodes. But your tree will look something roughly like that. You take the spell crit nodes. We're getting some new trap nodes here. Pick them up. We'll probably get a new trap cluster to say around here. Pick that up. There's quite a few points left floating, so just take that as a rough base. And yeah, that's sort of that. Get Zealot's Oath, so all your regen works for it. And since Ignite and Shock immune, you're then able to stack a bunch of unique flasks, no worries, easy peasy. Once you can afford it, you want to drop CI and go low life, but obviously not many of you will be going low life league starting. But yeah, so 2 points, go CI early, then go low life later. Also, another thing worth noting, according to Ziggy and from a lot of the footage we've seen, it looks like there's going to be a lot of chaos damage, like a lot of chaos damage in Incursion. So CI might feel quite strong just being able to kind of shrug off a lot of that damage. So, that's what I'd recommend for anyone wanting to go Saboteur. And for anyone wanting to go Life Base, especially for Fire Base, I highly recommend Scion. The reason why I recommend Scion over Saboteur for Life Base now, Saboteur also gets the 20% regen, but it also has a bunch of extra points to float with. The reason why I'd rather go like pure life scaling or pure energy shield scaling, Mind Over Matter is very strong, it does work, but when your defense is split between life and mana, it makes your 20% regen feel a lot weaker. I feel like if you're trying to really abuse that, which you want to be getting the most out of it. So if you're playing a fire base, so either, say blast rain traps or just like a fire trapper, you can go Saboteur, giving you 30% increased global AoE. This is more than you get from Saboteur. This will affect stuff like Blasphemy. It gives you some free penetration, it gives you the 20% regen, and it gives you blind enemies on hit. And then Chieftain gives you even more regen, some percent strength, and then 10% chance to cover rare or unique enemies in Ash for 10 seconds on hit. If you're using Flamethrower Trap or Cremation Trap for single target, it's very important that you keep the bosses as slow as possible to really pin them into your kill zones. And both of those abilities hit very rapidly, so you'll very quickly hit that application. And you can jump to Marauder Start, meaning you can jump to this little extra of life here, which is the difference between having 220% life and 180% life, which is a lot. Also gives you a bunch of regen, a bunch of strength, base strength and stuff. So it means you can run Comb's Heart or whatever. I think it's really powerful. If you're not going for like a fire-based, Saboteur, you could go for Guardian for even more life regeneration. Also gives you some physical mitigation if you run a bunch of auras. You can also run Elementus for even more penetration, guaranteed shocks. Necromancer is interesting if you really want to meme it up with skill effect duration. And Occultist is also very powerful if you want to go for a CI-based, not low-life option, running maybe double blasphemies or whatever. You could also maybe do Juggernaut if you're going for a bow-based trapper for the 1k accuracy, and you cannot be chilled and cannot be stunned. Although, to be honest, if you're going bow-based, I would probably recommend Deadeye, but I'll get to that sort of later. But yeah, sort of base idea here is get a bunch of life, pick up the AoE nodes, pick up the trap nodes. All trap trees look pretty much exactly the same. If they're life, if they're energy shield, you pick the trap nodes, you pick the crit nodes. The bow trappers, I haven't got any trees prepared because these will change a lot based on where these trap nodes move to. This trap cluster here will probably move around Acro somewhere, and if we get some really overpowered nodes around about here, then just add some extra points, come down, pick them up, probably grab Acro if you're next to it. Obviously, you're going to want point blank for the bow-based stuff, but yes. I'm Tarke. Hopefully that helps some of you with your 3.3 planning. We're very, very close to getting the patch notes, so expect more in-depth stuff then. Have a good day. Bye-bye.